The rain was coming down hard when my son-in-law threw my suitcase onto the soaked driveway. "That's all your stuff," he said, shoving $500 into my hand. "Get out! You don't belong here anymore." My daughter stood beside him, staring down at the floor. "Dad, this is better for everyone." Then the front door slammed shut and locked behind them. I thought losing my family was the worst thing that could ever happen to me until the next morning, when a call from a lawyer changed my entire life. The suitcase hit the wet pavement with a sound I will never forget. Not a crash, not a bang, just a dull, heavy thud, the kind of sound that tells you something is over. The zipper split open on impact, and 14 months' worth of folded shirts, my old leather work boots, the framed photograph of Loretta from our 25th anniversary, all of it tumbled out across the driveway in the pouring October rain. I stood on the front porch in my canvas work shirt and stared at my life scattered across the concrete. Gareth filled the doorway behind me. "Welcome back to Grandpa's Revenge. I'm glad you're here with me today. If these kinds of stories speak to something real in you, I'd be grateful if you took a moment to like and subscribe. It means more than you know." Before we get into today's story, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What do you hope to walk away with after listening a lesson, a feeling, or something else entirely? Now, a quick note, some details in this story have been shaped for the telling, and any resemblance to specific real people or events is purely coincidental. What matters is the truth underneath it. Arms folded across his chest jaw, locked tight, the look of a man who'd settled something in his own mind long before he came to the door. 38 years old, built wide through the shoulders, the kind of neighbor who hollered across the fence at cookouts and showed up to coach Little League without being asked. But standing under that yellow porch light with rain hammering the gutters, he could have been anybody. A stranger. Not someone I'd shared a Thanksgiving table with. "That's everything," he said. I went through the room a second time, turned back around slow. My knees ached the way they always do when a cold front moves in payment on a 31-year debt to the shop floor. Looking past Gareth's shoulder, I scanned the lit hallway for Nadine. She hadn't moved far, 10 feet back maybe, arms pulled tight around her own ribcage, her gaze aimed somewhere past me, close to my left ear, but not quite meeting my eyes. She hadn't been able to look at me straight on in weeks. Nadine. The word came out of me hoarser than I wanted it to. "Nadine, honey, one night. Just let me in for tonight. Morning comes and I'll work it out. I mean it." Her lips pressed together into a thin line. One small step backward away from the door, back toward the warmth inside. "Dad, it's better this way." The words came out flat rehearsed, like she'd been running those 5 words through her head since lunchtime. "Gareth and I need some room. We all do. You get that right? Cody's out already. He said the boy doesn't need anything tonight but sleep." Gareth unfolded his arms and fished a folded stack of bills from his shirt pocket, holding it out between us. Something lurched in my gut when I saw what it was. 500, he said. "That'll carry you through a motel for a few weeks, cover some food. More than enough to get back on your feet." I studied the money. I studied his hand holding it. 31 years I'd worked as a machinist, engine components, hydraulic fittings, custom fabrication for outfits spread across 3 counties. In all that time, no money had ever felt like this felt. But the rain wasn't letting up, and I was 69 years old, and my daughter stood 10 feet away, having already weighed me against her husband's comfort and reached her verdict. I took the money. "Gareth," I said, pressing the bills into my shirt pocket without so much as glancing at the count. "Tonight is something you won't forget." Not a flicker crossed his face. He took hold of the door and eased it shut, one soft, definitive click. I stood there on the porch, listening to the deadbolt slide home. The rain intensified. I came down off the steps and went to my knees in the wet driveway joints, howling, and began picking my soaked clothes off the pavement with my bare hands. The photo of Loretta was face down in a puddle. I lifted it and rubbed it dry against my canvas work shirt, but the damage was done. Water had slipped under the glass and clouded the image from inside. Her face was still there, gone soft at the edges, that smile aimed at something the camera never caught. "I know," I said quietly. "I know." I pushed everything back into the wrecked suitcase as well as the busted zipper would allow, and hauled it to the curb. The rain had soaked through my canvas work shirt inside of 45 seconds. I thumbed open the rideshare app, fingers already going wooden from the cold. Waiting, I turned and looked back at the house one more time. The porch light died. Then the front room window went black. Then Nadine's shape appeared up in the bedroom window there, and gone in a breath. She looked down at me in the rain beside that broken bag, then lifted her hand and drew the curtain across. That was when it landed. Not the part about my daughter siding with her husband. I'd been watching that take shape for months. The turn backs at supper, the eye rolls whenever I asked about my mail, the steady drift of my belongings first from the guest room, then to the storage closet, then to that musty room at the back that reeked of dried paint and mouse traps. None of that surprised me anymore. What struck me crouching in the rain at 9:47 on a Friday night in October was something larger. I had made a grave error 14 months back when I let go of the house that Loretta and I had called home for 33 years. We'd purchased it the same year Nadine walked into her first kindergarten classroom, a brick colonial 3 bedrooms on Kellner Road. Front walk crack down the middle garage, roomy enough to fit 2 vehicles and still leave space for a workbench. 33 years I'd kept that place together, new shingles on the roof, replumbing the basement, rewiring the kitchen after the old circuit started tripping. Loretta used to say, "I love the house more than I love television," and she probably wasn't wrong. Once she was gone, walking through those rooms felt like moving through an exhibit. Everywhere I looked something of hers. Her reading glasses beside the bed, her cardigan on the hook near the back door, a grocery list on the fridge and her handwriting still hanging there 8 months after we buried her because I hadn't been able to make myself take it down. Nadine had been the one to push me towards selling a clean break. She'd called it a chance to start fresh. She said I should come to Peoria, let her keep tabs on me. I held out for months. Floyd had phoned 3 times that fall, trying to get me to come over to his side of town. Said the spare rooms were just sitting empty and neither of us needed to be rattling around alone. I turned him down every time. I needed to be where my daughter was. I needed to trust that it still counted for something. The driver rolled up in a dark blue Civic, popped the trunk from the seat, and didn't bother getting out. I heaved in the wet bag and tried to think through my options. Know of any motel close by? I called through the window. Somewhere inexpensive. Young guy, earbuds in both ears, caught my reflection in the rear view. His eyes tracked from my rain-soaked canvas work shirt to the broken zipper to the dark porch behind me. "Mrs. Fleming's on Forest Hill Avenue has rooms," he said. $45 a night, cheaper by the week. She runs a clean place. I climbed in. We left the curb and I kept my face forward, one hand flat over my shirt pocket, where $500 in damp bills and a water-blurred photograph were the only things I had left. No destination I belonged to. For the first time in 69 years, I felt what it actually meant to have no one. The room was $45 a night. Mrs. Fleming walked me up herself, a solid woman in her early 70s. Silver hair pinned, neat, the sort of firm handshake you rarely encounter anymore. She'd size me up on her stoop at 10:15 on a Friday night, drenched bag split open, and hadn't pressed me with a single question I wasn't ready for. "Room 7's down at the end," she said, and passed me a key on a wooden fob with the number scorched into the wood. "You share the bathroom, but mornings are quiet. Breakfast sets out at 7. You look like a man who needs coffee." "Yes, ma'am," I said. "Coffee's about the least of what I need." She gave one slow nod, the kind that belongs to someone who's witnessed enough to understand that certain things sit better left unspoken. The room was spare, a narrow bed dressed in a green and gray quilt, a dresser carrying a lamp that leaned left, a single wooden chair angled toward the window, and a radiator that banged and sighed all night like something in pain working through it. Outside the glass, a narrow side yard where an elm tree stood half bare, its leaves matted flat against the brown grass below. I settled onto the mattress edge and turned out my shirt pocket. $500 damp and limp. I pressed each bill flat on the dresser top and ran the count. 400s, 220s, 210s. I sat looking at that money for a long while, running numbers I didn't want to be running. Then I stretched out on that quilt and fixed my eyes on the water stain on the ceiling, shaped a little like the state of Michigan, and let my mind go back over the 14 months I'd spent under my daughter's roof. The early weeks weren't bad. Nadine had put fresh sheets on the guest bed, and Cody would crawl up into my lap each morning before the day started asking for stories. Gareth had kept it civil, the particular civility of someone tolerating a situation they didn't choose. Then Thanksgiving came, and the guest room became a problem. Gareth's mother needed it. Could I take the pullout in the office just for a stretch? A few weeks turned into all of January. By March, the office had been reassigned to a home gym. There was a small room at the back of the house, storage mostly emptied out now, and it was only going to be temporary. They said just while they worked out something better. That back room measured 8 by 10 feet. One window facing the fence, a bare bulb on a pull cord. The insulation had gaps in the walls, and when the wind swung out of the north, you could feel it right through the drywall. I'd wedged a strip of cardboard along the bottom of the door to block the draft. "You're not contributing, Harold," Gareth had said it one evening in April, standing in the kitchen doorway with a beer in his hand. "Nadine and I are covering every expense in this house. The least you could do is pull your weight around here." So, I had pulled my weight. I cleared the driveway all through January and February, fixed the garbage disposal in March, the dripping faucet in the upstairs bath in April, the screen door that hung crooked and wouldn't latch in May, cut the grass through the whole summer, kept an eye on Cody 3 afternoons a week so Nadine could make it to her book club or her yoga class or wherever she was headed. Gareth had taken to calling me his live-in handyman when he chatted up his friends on the phone. He wasn't quiet about it. The man's voice carried, and the walls were thin. "At least he's good for something," he'd said once, laughing. I'd been back in that room. I caught every word. Nadine never stepped in to say a thing. That was what ate at me deepest. Not Gareth's meanness, it was blunt and out in the open, which in a strange way made it easier to hold at a distance. Nadine's silence was the thing that worked its way into my chest and took up residence. She'd hear him say something cutting and look away, or steer the conversation somewhere else, or suddenly find something urgent pulling her into another room. She'd done her accounting. I hadn't made the ledger. I sat up on the edge of the bed in room 7 and looked at my old leather work boots on the floor and felt the full weight of everything I had allowed to happen. I had sold Loretta's house, given up the one solid thing that was mine. Mortgage cleared completely in 2018, property taxes current, a deed with my name on it. And I'd done it because I believed blood counted for more than a piece of paper. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my call history. Floyd's last call had come in 6 weeks back. I'd missed it. He'd left a voicemail I'd played through twice and never answered. "Hey, old man, it's me. Listen, I've got 3 empty bedrooms and a dog who needs someone to bother. Offer stands same as it always has. No strings, no schedule. Just come. Call me back when you stop being so stubborn." I never did call him back. I laid the phone face down on the dresser and stretched out on the quilt and listened to the radiator work knock and hiss, while outside the elm tree shuddered in the October wind and dragged what was left of its leaves across the glass. I told myself morning would bring some clarity. Then the phone buzzed against the dresser. The screen threw a brief wash of light across the ceiling and went dark. I reached over without getting up and flipped it face up. Unknown number. Illinois area code. Nothing I recognized. I set it back down. It buzzed again right away. Same number. My thumb hovered over the screen. Every instinct I had told me it was a robocall, somebody pushing something I had no use for at 11 on a Friday night. But 2 calls back to back, neither one rolling to voicemail that made something stand up along the back of my neck in a way I couldn't explain away. I answered, "Mr. Vance." The voice was even and measured, belonging to someone who had made a practice of delivering hard news without letting it show. "My name is Gordon Hewitt. I'm an attorney here in Peoria. I apologize for the late hour. I've been trying to reach you for several days." A pause. "This concerns Floyd Easton." My chest seized up so hard I nearly came straight off the mattress. "What about Floyd?" The pause that followed ran maybe 2 seconds. I felt every one of them. "Mr. Vance," Gordon Hewitt said, choosing his words with care. "I think it would be better if we spoke in person. Are you free tomorrow afternoon?" I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in room 7 staring up at the water stain on the ceiling, shaped a little like the state of Michigan, and turned Gordon Hewitt's voice over in my mind. The deliberate steadiness of it, the way he'd said Floyd's name, like a man carrying something fragile the length of a long room. By 6 in the morning, I'd given up on sleep entirely. I used the shared bathroom down the hall, dug out the least wrinkled shirt from my damp suitcase, and came downstairs to Mrs. Fleming's kitchen, where she'd already set out coffee and a tray of bran muffins that sent a smell through the whole ground floor, the kind that makes you feel just for a moment that things might yet be all right. "You look like a man who's got somewhere to be," she said, setting a mug in front of me without asking. "Got a meeting this afternoon," I said. "Attorney in town." She made a sound that wasn't quite a word and refilled her own cup. "You want eggs?" "No, thank you, ma'am." "I'll make eggs," she said, and turned back to the stove. I sat at her kitchen table and worked through 2 cups of coffee and the eggs she made without asking twice. Neither of us said very much. It was one of the most comfortable silences I'd sat inside in a good long while. Mrs. Fleming had a gift for being present without pressing for anything, which is rarer than it ought to be. At 2 Stosiers in the afternoon, I walked into Hewitt and Associates on Adams Street. The receptionist, a young woman with reading glasses pushed up into her hair, walked me back to a corner office with tall windows overlooking a parking lot lined with bare-limbed trees. Gordon Hewitt stood when I entered. Maybe 50, trim, dark suit. The kind of deliberate handshake that tells you a man has given thought to what it communicates. His face was the face of someone who'd learned to keep his own reactions from entering the room. "Mr. Vance," he said, "please sit down." I sat. He sat. He folded his hands on the desk. "I'll be direct with you," he said. "Floyd Easton passed away on October 3rd. Cardiac arrest. It was fast. He didn't suffer. The room didn't spin the way I might have expected. It simply went very still, the way a room goes still in the instant after something that cannot be undone. I sat in that stillness and breathed through it. Floyd Easton. 42 years. We'd first met in the break room of the same machine shop back in 1981. Both of us 27, both eating sandwiches over a parts catalog, arguing about the wrong way to torque a manifold bolt. He laughed at something I said. I laughed at something he said. That was all it took, the way most real friendships start with no plan behind them. He'd moved off the floor eventually and crossed into the business side of things, gas stations to begin with, then property, then a portfolio that had grown into something neither of us could have pictured back when we were eating those sandwiches in 1981. He never married, said he was too stubborn, too particular, too comfortable in his own company. I'd always told him those were perfectly good reasons to get a dog. "I didn't know," I said. My voice came out smaller than I'd intended. "Nobody told me." Hewitt nodded slowly. "There were some difficulties tracking you down. Your last known address was no longer valid." He paused. "I understand you've recently changed your situation." "You could say that?" Hewitt opened a folder on his desk and studied it a moment. "Mr. Easton named you the sole beneficiary of his estate. That includes 8 fuel service stations across 3 counties, 7 commercial real estate properties, and a managed investment portfolio. The total assessed value as of his last annual review is approximately $22.4 million. I heard the number. I understood the number. And yet it landed somewhere outside of me, like a sound coming through a thick wall, real enough but not quite reachable from where I was sitting. "Floyd," I said, not to Hewitt, just to the air in front of me. "He was very specific in his instructions," Hewitt continued. He reached to the side of the desk and lifted a wooden box roughly the size of a shoebox, edges sanded smooth, finished in something dark. He placed it on the desk between us. My name was written across the top in Floyd's handwriting, that same loose, unhurried print I'd recognized on birthday cards and the occasional letter over 4 decades. Harold, just that. No last name. As if there were only one Harold in the world who might ever need to open this box. "He asked that you open it privately," Hewitt said, "when you're ready." I looked at the box. My throat tightened until swallowing took real effort. I pressed my palm flat against the lid, feeling the wood grain beneath it, and I couldn't have explained why that simple act, just touching it, made my eyes burn the way it did. Why didn't he tell me, I asked, that he was sick? Why didn't he say anything? Hewitt's expression shifted. "Not much, just enough. He didn't want you coming to him out of obligation," he said carefully. Floyd was very clear on that point. I sat with that a moment. "He called me," I said, 6 weeks ago. I never called him back." Hewitt said nothing. "He didn't need to?" I picked up the box, heavier than it looked. I held it in both hands and stared at my name in Floyd's handwriting, and felt something crack open at the center of my chest. Not break exactly, but open the way a window opens, letting in air that is colder and more real than anything that had been in the room before. "I'll need some time," I told Hewitt. "Of course." He rose and extended his hand. "Take all the time you need, Mr. Vance. I'll be in touch Monday about the formal transfer proceedings." He paused. "There is one more thing." I looked up. "Floyd had a dog," Hewitt said. "A Labrador, 13 years old. He left specific instructions about him as well." Hewitt hesitated as if weighing how much to add. "He asked that you be the one to meet him first." I carried the box out into the October afternoon and settled into my car in the parking lot, with it resting on the passenger's seat. The bare trees in the lot shifted in the wind. A woman passed by, pushing a stroller. Somewhere down the block, someone's radio was playing an old country song I half knew. I sat there a long time, just looking at my name in Floyd's handwriting. I was afraid of what I might find inside. The parking lot outside Hewitt's office had cleared out by the time I finally turned the key. I drove back to Mrs. Fleming's boarding house on Forest Hill Avenue with the wooden box on the passenger seat, buckled in with the seatbelt. The way you'd secure something you were worried might shift if you took a corner too fast, which was ridiculous. I knew it was ridiculous, but I did it all the same. Back in room 7, I set the box on the dresser beneath the tilting lamp and sat on the edge of the bed and looked at it for a long time. The radiator knocked and hissed. Rain tapped the window again, lighter than the night before, more a suggestion than a storm. I was afraid of what Floyd had written, not because I thought it would be bad, because I knew it would be true. And Floyd's truth had always had a way of finding the gaps in whatever walls I'd built around the parts of myself I didn't care to examine too closely. I got up, pulled the wooden chair over to the dresser, and sat down in front of the box. I lifted the lid. The first thing inside was a cream-colored envelope, my name on the front, in Floyd's unhurried print. Beneath it, I could make out the edge of something else. Papers, photographs, maybe, but I didn't look yet. I opened the envelope carefully. The way you open something you know can only be opened once. The letter was 3 pages written by hand on yellow legal pad paper, the lines slightly uneven the way handwriting gets when a man is worn down. Harold, if you're opening this box, it means they finally did what I always feared they would. I'm sorry I wasn't there when it happened. I want you to know I tried to be. I had to put the letter down. I pressed both hands flat against the dresser and breathed through my nose until the burning behind my eyes settled enough to read clearly again. You turned me down 3 times. Fall of last year, Christmas, and once more in March when I called and you didn't pick up. I'm not telling you that to make you feel bad. I'm telling you because I want you to understand that I knew. I've known Nadine and that husband of hers long enough to see which direction things were heading. I didn't want to be right. I very much wanted to be wrong. But you always did love that girl more than was probably good for either of you. My chest tightened until drawing a full breath took actual effort. I kept reading. In the bottom of this box, you'll find every letter you ever sent me. I kept them all. I know you thought I was terrible at correspondence, and I was, but I read every single one of them. Twice, usually. Sometimes more. There's a photograph in there, too. The one Bert Kozak took at the shop in '82. You've got grease on your face, and you're laughing at something I said. I kept it in my desk drawer for 40 years. I stopped reading. I reached into the box and lifted out the bundle of letters held together by a rubber band gone brittle with age. There were more than I'd remembered writing, dozens of them spanning 4 decades, some on notebook paper, some on the backs of parts invoices from the shop, a few on actual stationery that Loretta had probably set in front of me, with a pen and a look that said she was tired of me not keeping in touch. Floyd had kept every single one. My hands were shaking, not the fine tremor of cold or too much coffee, something deeper, something that started in the sternum and moved outward from there. Beneath the letters was the photograph, black and white, 4x6, slightly curled at the corners. 2 young men in work shirts standing in front of a lathe, both grinning at something off camera. I recognized the shop, recognized the machine, recognized the particular way Floyd stood with his weight on his left foot. I barely recognized myself. 27 years old, jaw-sharp hair, dark grease on my left cheek, exactly where Floyd had placed it. I turned the photograph over. On the back, in Floyd's handwriting, the day it started. Keep going. I had to set the photograph down on the dresser and press the back of my hand against my mouth because the sound trying to come out of me was not one I wanted to make in a room with thin walls. I stayed like that for a minute. Then I went back to the letter. There's one more thing in the box. Bottom left corner, wrapped in the blue cloth. That's the watch I was wearing the day you pulled me out of that drainage ditch off Route 24 in '87. You probably remember it better than I do. I only remember the cold, and then your voice telling me to hold on. Open the back cover. I found the cloth bundle and unwrapped it carefully. A watch, old-fashioned round face, the kind that wound by hand. The crystal was scratched, but the hands still moved. I turned it over, found the small notch for the case back, and pried it open with my thumbnail. Engraved on the inside of the cover, in letters so small I had to tilt the lamp to read them. Thank you for saving my life that year. Everything after was because of you. The drainage ditch off Route 24, February 1986. A late afternoon in February, temperature dropping fast. Floyd's truck in the ditch at a bad angle, the door jammed, water seeping in from somewhere underneath. I had been 2 minutes behind him on the same road. I hadn't done anything heroic. I had broken the passenger window with a tire iron and pulled him out and sat with him on the frozen roadside until the ambulance arrived. I had never thought of it as saving his life. I had thought of it as being in the right place. Floyd had spent 38 years thinking otherwise. I sat in the wooden chair in room 7 with the watch in one hand and the letter in the other, and I cried. Not the polite, measured kind you manage at funerals when you're holding yourself together for everyone else. The ugly kind, shoulders shaking, chest heaving. The kind that comes from somewhere you didn't know was that full until it starts to empty out. I cried for Floyd. 3 unanswered phone calls. I wept for every one of them. I wept for a snapshot of 2 people at 27 who couldn't have imagined what 4 decades would cost them. Floyd's letter was still across my lap, the watch cupped in both hands when something pulled my attention to the hallway. Not a voice, not a knock, something quieter. A faint, soft breath pushed under the gap at the bottom of the door. I set the watch down and went to open it. What I found there stopped me cold. A yellow Labrador, years heavy on him, his muzzle bleached nearly white with age. He moved the way old dogs do, each step considered, joints treated with a kind of earned respect. He was parked just outside room 7, tail swinging in a long, unhurried rhythm. None of the wild thrashing of a young animal. This was the greeting of a creature who had been patient and who knew the wait was finally over. When his dark eyes found mine, they were so calm, so completely there, that something locked up inside my chest all over again. This "hey buddy," I managed, the words scraped coming out. "Hey there." He closed the distance between us and pushed the whole of his head into my leg. Not a nudge, a full committed lean skull, and all the way a dog does when he's made up his mind about you. My hand found the back of his neck on its own. And there I stood in the corridor of a Peoria, Illinois boarding house, neither moving nor speaking, just anchored. Gordon Hewitt came around the far end of the hall, coat still buttoned, briefcase in one hand, leash in the other. He took in the dog planted against my leg, and something behind his composed expression gave way just a hairline. "I apologize for returning tonight," Hewitt said. Floyd's instructions left no room for interpretation. He wanted Scout delivered to you in person on the very day the box reached you. A beat of silence. He said, and these are his exact words the dog will know, "Don't hand this off to anyone else." I glanced down at Scout, who hadn't budged an inch. That tail kept its slow, steady pendulum. "How old is he?" 12, Hewitt said. "Floyd brought him home as a puppy the year after your fishing trip up in Wisconsin. Apparently you'd told him, a man ought to have something waiting that's genuinely glad he walked back through the door." That conversation came back to me without effort. A Saturday in 2010, the 2 of us on Floyd's back porch while our coffee went cold. I'd said something to the effect that every man needed at least one living creature in his corner, one that didn't keep score and didn't want anything back. Floyd had laughed and called it pillow sampler philosophy. 6 weeks after that, he rang me up to say he'd gone and gotten a dog. Named him Scout, he said, because the name was a daily reminder of what mattered. "Come in," I told Hewitt, "both of you." We arranged ourselves in room 7, perched on the bed's edge. Hewitt taking the wooden chair, and Scout settled flat across my feet, with his chin on his paws, monitoring the room like it was his job. At some point, Mrs. Fleming had materialized and placed a tray in the hallway outside, 2 mugs of coffee and a plate of shortbread cookies unrequested. I was starting to grasp that this was simply her nature. "I'd like to walk you through the estate structure," Hewitt said, case open across his knee. "Today has handed you a great deal, I understand that. But Floyd wanted you clear on what you've taken on before anything else moves forward." "Go ahead," I said. "The 8 fuel service stations are active, going concerns," Hewitt said, sliding a folder onto the bed next to me. "Floyd kept on a general manager, Len Mabry, who's been steering daily operations for 11 years. Solid, profitable businesses. Their combined net revenue runs about $1.4 million annually. Nothing requires your decision. Right now, Len knows how to run them." "I know Len," I said. "Floyd brought us together at his 4th of July cookout 5 years back or so. Decent man, he is," Hewitt said. On the commercial property side, 7 buildings spread across Peoria and 2 surrounding counties, a mix of small retail and warehouse space. 4 carry long-term leases, tenants in good standing. The remaining 3 have sat vacant, and the property management firm has been working those. He turned to page 4. "The investment portfolio sits with a fiduciary advisor over at Heartland Federal. It's currently valued at roughly $14.6 million equities, municipal bonds, a real estate investment trust, spread around sensibly. The advisor's name is Audrey Finch, outstanding at what she does. She'll be looking to sit down with you inside 30 days. I took all of it in the way a man receives unexpected medical news from a doctor. Each piece lands and registers, but the combined gravity of it travels slower, arrives later. Floyd had raised every bit of this from bare ground. From nothing I said, one gas station on the east side of town. That's right, Hewitt confirmed. He secured it in 1993, a small business loan, plus whatever he'd put aside from trade work. 3 years to clear the debt, 2 more before he signed papers on the second location. He paused. He mentioned to me once that he'd never have had the courage to put his name on that first loan, except that a friend had made him believe certain things were worth gambling on. I looked at Scout. Scout looked back. He put that in the letter too, I said just above a whisper. About the ditch. I know, Hewitt said. He gave me the whole account. Said you never raised it again once that day was behind you. Said there wasn't a more generous thing a person had ever done for him, pulling him out and then carrying it in silence, never once letting him feel the debt. Nothing came to me in response. The burning behind my eyes was back, and I'd run low on the will to fight it. I pressed my wrist against them and let the sting do what it wanted. What's the first step on my end, I asked. This weekend, nothing, Hewitt said, no softness in it. We opened the formal probate filing on Monday. Illinois law puts a court-appointed representative in charge of validating the will and certifying the asset transfer to you as beneficiary. Floyd's estate clears the simplified threshold, so we're looking at supervised administration. That process typically takes 6 to 9 months to run its course. The businesses keep operating as they are throughout, and I remain counsel for the estate. 6 to 9 months, I said back to him. Your position is protected the whole way through, Hewitt said. The court has to sign off before anything is moved, sold, or pledged. You're not exposed. He shut the folder. All I need from you at this moment is a phone number and somewhere to send correspondence. I swept my eyes around room 7, the lamp listing to one side, the green and gray quilt, the water stain on the ceiling, shaped a little like the state of Michigan. Room 7, I said. Mrs. Fleming's boarding house on Forest Hill Avenue. I don't expect I'm going anywhere soon. Hewitt wrote it down, nodded once, said nothing about it. He rose, fastened his coat, retrieved his briefcase. His eyes went to Scout still draped across my feet. Floyd left me with one more thing, Hewitt said, pausing in the doorway. He said, tell Harold the dog already knows he's a good man. The dog is never wrong about that. After Hewitt was gone, I stayed put for a long stretch, Scout's weight warm across my feet, Floyd's letter on the bed at my side, the watch turning slowly in my fingers. The radiator ticked and knocked. Outside, the rain had quit. The elm tree beyond the window was motionless in the cold dark. After a time, Scout raised his head and settled his chin on my knee, those dark eyes steady on my face. You had 42 years with him, I told him, same as me. Once slow, his tail swept the floor. I reached across and clicked off the tilting lamp. Darkness came in, and with it, the familiar press of the watch against my palm, Scout's warmth along my leg. It was the first moment since I'd stood soaked in front of Nadine's house, clutching a busted suitcase, that I didn't feel like I was the only person left. Come morning, the phone on the dresser pulled me out of sleep. Nadine's name lit up the screen. One look, and I knew. News finds its way around Peoria quickly. I didn't pick up. Her name flashed 3 times before the call gave up and went to voicemail. I laid the phone face down on the dresser and turned to Scout, who had lifted his head at the noise and sat watching me ears up and forward. Not yet, I told him. We went out together into the cold of that Sunday morning, a slow circuit around the block, the two of us keeping whatever pace our old bones allowed, unhurried, but not stopping either. The streets around Mrs. Fleming's boarding house on Forest Hill Avenue had the character of a Peoria neighborhood that had been working class for 60 years and never pretended otherwise. Aluminum siding, chain-link fences, a jack-o'-lantern or two still slumped on front stoops caving in at the edges. Scout paused at every third tree along the way, and I let him take his time, and neither of us had any complaint about the arrangement. My phone went off twice in my coat pocket while we were out there, Nadine both times. Then a text came through. Dad, I heard about Mr. Easton. Can we talk? I'm so sorry. I stood on the sidewalk and read it with Scout pressed against my feet. Sorry. That was the word she used? A fortnight earlier, she had watched from an upstairs window and drawn the curtain while I stood soaking in the rain beside a burst suitcase. Now, sorry was what she had. I tucked the phone away and we finished our circuit. By 11 that morning, I was in Mrs. Fleming's front parlor, a small, quiet room, working through a newspaper she'd set out when I caught the sound of an engine out front. I recognized it without looking, the 2017 Ford Expedition. By 11 that morning, I was in Mrs. Fleming's front parlor, a small, quiet room, working through a newspaper she'd set out when I caught the sound of an engine out front. I recognized it without looking, the 2017 Ford Expedition that Gareth had leased, the one he'd spent the better part of 6 months discussing as though horsepower were a window into a man's soul. I stayed in my chair. The bell rang. Mrs. Fleming stepped out from the kitchen and offered me a look that held a question in it, and I gave a small shake of my head. She answered the door regardless. It was her house, and she was not a woman whose front door went unanswered because someone else had trouble in their life. From the entryway, I heard Nadine's voice, warm, by about a degree too much polished into the particular register she deployed whenever she was working towards something. "I'm so sorry to intrude. I'm Nadine Corbett Harold's daughter. Might he be available?" Mrs. Fleming took a beat before responding. It was the kind of beat that only belongs to a woman who has lived long enough to read a situation at a glance. "I'll go tell him you're here," she said. She came to the parlor doorway and held my eyes. I set down the paper and got up. Nadine was standing out on the porch. She had a foil-covered casserole dish in both hands and a smile she'd clearly worked to put together. She'd dressed well, hair done, everything coordinated, the sort of appearance that requires 40 minutes on a Sunday and is not accidental. Her other arm cradled a smaller container wrapped in plastic. "Dad." The word came out with a slight catch in her voice, which may have come from somewhere real, or may have been practiced. Lately with Nadine, I could no longer separate the two. "I heard about Floyd. I'm so sorry. I know what he meant to you." "Thank you," I said. "I made your favorite." She extended the dish toward me. "Chicken and dumplings, Mom's recipe." I looked at the dish. Then I looked at my daughter. My wife Loretta had made that chicken and dumplings on winter Sundays for 30 years. That smell, thick, slow, particular, had filled our kitchen from November clear through March. It was the smell that meant the week had closed and everyone was where they belonged. Nadine had sat at that table and eaten it hundreds of times over the years. Not once, to my knowledge, had she made it herself. Not in any of the 14 months I'd spent under her roof. Not at a single holiday I could bring to mind. She'd said to her mother once, laughing, as she said it, that she had no patience for a recipe that couldn't be finished inside 45 minutes. "You made this," I said. "Of course," she said. Her smile opened a little wider. "I called Aunt Bev for the recipe. I wanted to do something for you." She nudged the dish in my direction. "Can I come in?" "We can sit out here on the porch," I said. The smile stayed on her face, but something behind her eyes shifted and recalibrated. She settled into one of Mrs. Fleming's porch chairs, placed the casserole dish on the little table between us, and laced her hands together in her lap, the way a person does when they are waiting for a verdict. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "Are you doing okay? This seems like a really nice place." "It really does. Mrs. Fleming seems lovely. But Dad, a boarding house isn't right for you. Come stay with us. We want you back home." "You and Gareth want me back home." I said yes. She held my gaze steadily with the kind of locked-in attention a person brings to an argument they've rehearsed. "We've talked about it. Gareth feels awful about the way everything fell apart. He truly does. He hasn't stopped worrying about you." My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I already had a good idea who it was. I took it out and checked. "Gareth." I picked up. "Hey." Gareth's voice had that loose, unhurried quality he put on when he wanted to come across as a man with nothing particular on his mind. "Rough week, sounds like. Hey, I heard about your buddy Floyd. Real shame. Good man from what I gather." Then a half-beat of silence, brief enough that anyone not paying close attention would have let it pass right by. "So, how much did he actually leave? Not are you all right, not how are you holding up." Not so much as a full minute of sympathy before the question he had actually dialed to ask. How much did he actually leave? Something dropped into place inside my chest, cold and settled and exact. The way a piece of machinery locks into its fitting once the tolerances finally line up. "Still working that out," I said. "The lawyers haven't finished sorting things." Right. Looser now." "Well, look, if navigating all of that gets to be too much, I'm happy to sit down and go through it with you. These estate situations have a way of getting tangled, especially when you're not used to that kind of paperwork. Nadine and I just want to see you taken care of. I appreciate that I said, I'll reach out. I ended the call. From across the little table, Nadine was watching me, hands still folded, face held carefully at nothing. Oh, that was Gareth, I said. I know, she said. I turned my attention back to the casserole dish between us. The foil had been folded down neatly all the way around the rim. The dish itself I didn't recognize, new bought for the occasion. Loretta's recipe in a brand new dish carried across town on a Sunday morning. Not because her father had been missed, but because something a neighbor said had shifted her arithmetic overnight. I reached into my coat pocket, the coat I'd had on, when Gareth pitched my suitcase out into the rain, and pulled out what I'd placed there before our walk that morning. A bread roll gone hard, the crust dried stiff after 2 days folded inside that pocket. I'd taken it from the gas station on the night they put me out, the only thing I'd bought myself before I found Mrs. Fleming's. I set it on the table alongside the casserole dish and let it sit there. The night you shut the door on me, I said my voice level that roll was my supper. Across the table, Nadine's expression moved through several things quickly. Surprise, then shame, then a brief flare of something defensive, then a deliberate return to neutral. Dad, she started. I'm holding on to it, I said. I can't say exactly why just yet, but I expect I'll understand when the moment comes. I got up, lifted the casserole dish off the table, and placed it back in her hands. Let Gareth know I'll be in touch on the estate question. I said, that's what this visit was for. Now you have your answer. Nadine stood there with the dish held against her, her eyes going bright with something, tears or anger, or the specific place where the two get tangled up and can't be told apart. That's not fair, she said, her voice pulling tight. No, I agreed. It genuinely isn't. I went inside. Through the parlor window, I watched her take the dish back to the expedition. She sat behind the wheel for a moment, engine off, and then pulled away. Scout came and positioned himself at my side, looking out. I know I said to him, I'm keeping the roll. Nadine rang on Tuesday, then Wednesday, then Thursday before 8 in the morning, which told me Gareth had her on a timetable. I picked up on Thursday. Dad. Her pitch had climbed 3 notes above its usual register, the voice she brought out when she needed something from you. I just really want us to sit down as a family. Cody's been asking where you are. That last part, that was the one piece of it I had no trouble believing. What time? I said. 6:00. She came back without a pause, like she'd had the answer waiting. I'm making beef brisket. I told her I'd be there. When I got off the phone, I glanced over at Scout and told him, she's cooking beef brisket tonight. Scout gave the floor one slow thump of his tail, exactly the amount of enthusiasm that called for. The bread roll had gone into my coat pocket that morning, on its own, almost. Not a decision, more like an instinct. Some things ride with you before you've figured out why. Walking up to the door, I caught the smell of beef brisket mixed with fake apple, one of those wall plug-ins sitting in the entry hall. The table inside had been dressed up the good holiday place. Mats laid out, flat candles burning low in the center. For a plain Sunday supper, it was a lot of production, nearly funny, except that it was trying too hard for funny to land. Gareth answered the door, pumping my hand and showing me all his teeth at once. Dad. The grip held a moment past where it should have. Really glad you came. Beer water. I've got that bourbon you used to like. Water's fine, I said. Cody came padding out of the hallway, 9 years old, his father's dark hair, Nadine's eyes. He held his face in the careful arrangement of a child rehearsing lines he's been given. Hi, Grandpa. Then something real cracked through the performance. Did you bring the dog? Scout couldn't make it, I told him, but he says hi. The disappointment that crossed Cody's face was genuine and uncensored, the most honest moment that house would offer all night. The meal itself was fine. Nadine had real ability in the kitchen when she chose to use it, and the beef brisket was done right. Gareth worked steadily through the bourbon, which softened his edges in a way that was both easier to sit with and more revealing than his careful, sober act. About 15 minutes in, he reached for the breadbasket and said, These estate attorneys, I've heard some of those firms have a way of letting things drag. If you want another set of eyes on anything, Nadine and I are right here. I appreciate that I said in the way a man says it when he means nothing will come of it. Nadine carried out pie after the plate store, bought though, she'd shifted it into one of her own dishes. Gareth dealt out large slices. Cody's came with ice cream on top, and for a short stretch, he was purely and simply happy, the way a child can be happy about a thing like that. Those 3 minutes watching him eat were the high point of the evening. Gareth settled back with his bourbon and held forth on property management, a natural feel for real estate. He said somebody at his golf club who had cleaned up on commercial deals. I let him go. When the table was cleared, I reached into my coat pocket and set the bread roll down on the tablecloth in front of me. It was hard, a little pressed out of shape, the crust faded to the color of old paper. There it sat beside the holiday place mats and the burned-down candles, looking precisely like what it was. Gareth went quiet. Nadine's gaze moved from the bread roll to my face, her expression shutting down carefully. Cody studied it, the way children study things they don't understand yet. "What's that?" "My supper the night I left," I said. "Gas station on Forest Hill Avenue. Bread roll, bottle of water. Ate them alone in room 7. I turned it slowly between my fingers. Funny, it still beats everything that was on this table tonight. Said it low and level, no anger underneath it. Just a fact stated the way facts are." From the kitchen came the hum of the refrigerator, which suddenly seemed very present. Gareth put his bourbon glass down on the tablecloth. The sound that made was small and very loud. Nadine's jaw went tight, eyes going bright in the way that happens when tears are being held back by will alone. She looked at the bread roll. She looked at the candles she had personally lit for this occasion. "Dad," she said, keeping her voice flat and quiet. "That's not fair." "No," I said, "it really isn't." I slipped the bread roll back into my pocket and got to my feet. I thanked them for dinner. The beef brisket was very good. Cody had trailed me to the entry hall without my noticing. He looked up, Nadine's eyes, Gareth's dark hair, an expression that didn't belong to either of them. 2 of my fingers disappeared inside his small fist. "Grandpa," he said just above a whisper, "can I talk to you outside?" The air beyond the front door was cold and motionless, carrying dead leaves and chimney smoke from somewhere down the block. Cody was standing on the front walk in only his socks. He'd come after me without pausing for shoes, which told me what he had to say wouldn't wait for the ordinary preparations. I crouched down to meet his eyes, my knees making their objections plain. "You'll freeze out here, bud." "I'm okay," he said. He wasn't okay. His whole frame was shivering, not just from the temperature, and his hands were wound together in front of him, fingers locked the way they get when something is pressing down too hard. "I'm right here," I said. "Take your time." He lifted his eyes to mine. Nadine's eyes, and inside them, I found something that split my chest clean open. Not grief exactly. Something that ran deeper than grief. The particular weight a child carries when grown-up trouble has been set on his shoulders, and he's been left to hold it. "Grandpa," he said, his voice falling to nearly nothing. "Dad said something." He stopped there, bottom lip pulled tight. "Whatever it is, you can tell me," I said. Cody swallowed. His eyes brimmed and the tears held their position, but barely the effort of keeping them there had his chin shaking. "Dad said, if you don't give them the money, I'm not supposed to call you Grandpa anymore." Those words arrived the way a dropped wrench arrives on concrete, the weight of them, the sound. I held my face together because the very last thing this boy needed was to see his grandfather come undone on the front lawn. "Did he say that straight to you?" I asked. "Or was it something you overheard?" "He said it to Mom." Cody's words were picking up speed, now tumbling out the way a child's words do once the dam gives. "In the kitchen before you showed up. He said if you didn't sign the papers, you weren't really family anymore, and I shouldn't be calling you Grandpa. He said you were being difficult." The last word broke apart in his throat. Mom didn't answer him. She just stood there stirring the beef brisket. I drew a slow breath through my nose, cold air all the way to the bottom. Nadine had been at that stove when her husband told their 9-year-old boy that his grandfather's standing in the family was contingent on ink on a page, and she had not offered one syllable in return. I placed both hands on Cody's shoulders. "You were right to tell me," I said. "That was a brave thing to do." One tear slipped free and moved down his left cheek. "But Grandpa," he said, his voice close to gone, "are you going to stop being my grandpa?" Something clenched in my chest hard enough that I had to set my back teeth. 9 years old out here in his socks on a freezing driveway, afraid that the adults around him held the power to cancel something that was never supposed to be conditional. "Cody," I brought him in close. He folded into me immediately, arms around my neck, face tucked against my shoulder, shaking with the deep, whole-body shaking of a child who has been clenching everything for too long. "Your dad can't make that happen. Nobody can. That is not a thing that gets taken from you." He nodded his head, moving against my shoulder. Something came out of him, then not a word, not a sob, but somewhere in the territory between them. "You're a good kid," I said, and I held on. "Everything the grown-ups are tangled up in, none of it touches you. Not a bit. That belongs to us, not to you." He stepped back and dragged his sleeve across his face. red eyes running, nose, looking in the same instant both smaller and older than 9. Is it about the money? He asked. 9 years old, they catch everything. It's wrapped up in a lot of things, I told him, and that was the truth. But you and me, we're gonna come out fine. Okay. He nodded, not as convinced as I would have wanted, but steadier than he'd been a minute before. I rose and looked toward the front door. Through the narrow side window, I could make out the hallway light and the silhouette of Gareth's shadow crossing the kitchen. Get yourself back inside and put some shoes on, I told Cody. And keep what we talked about between us. Just for tonight. Can you do that? He gave a nod, waited with the seriousness of a child who grasps that certain things are worth guarding. He moved back up the walk without a sound in his socks and eased through the door. I stayed where I was in the cold driveway and tipped my head back. The cloud cover had broken. October stars, sharp and clean, the kind a cold front scours into the sky. I dialed. Hewitt answered on the second ring. Gordon, I said, turning my back to the house. I know it's Sunday, but I think it's time we set a trap. The pause on his end was short and entirely unsurprised. What I'm about to share changed the entire shape of what came next, and once I understood the full measure of what had been done to me, there was no going back to not knowing. Before we get there, let me ask you something. If someone you loved had been quietly working against you, would you confront them the moment you knew, or would you wait and let the truth do the work on its own? It figured you'd be calling, he said. Come in tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. Bring Scout. I took one last look back at the house. Kitchen light still burning. Somewhere behind those walls, Nadine was scrubbing the beef brisket pan. Gareth was working through his bourbon. Cody was lacing his shoes back up, saying nothing because a 9-year-old boy had just shown more backbone than either of his parents. I turned the key and drove back through the cold October dark, headed toward room 7 and whatever was waiting. Gordon Hewitt's office at 8 in the morning had a different quality than it did in the afternoon. The light came in thin and gray and unforgiving, without any warmth to smooth over the hard edges. Scout curled himself under my chair and was asleep inside of 2 minutes, which I found admirable. Hewitt had 2 coffees waiting and a yellow legal pad laid out in front of him. He looked like a man who had put his Sunday evening to good use. Walk me through all of it, he said, starting from when Nadine first called, so I did. All of it, the corn pudding dish. Gareth's phone call asking what Floyd had left, before he got around to asking how I was holding up. The beef brisket dinner with the holiday placemats and the store-bought pie. Cody out on the cold front walk in his socks, telling me word for word what his father had said in the kitchen. Hewitt wrote without interrupting. When I finished, he laid his pen down. They've already filed, he said. Filed what? I asked, startled. A guardianship petition. He turned the legal pad to face me. Gareth and Nadine had filed 4 days ago, the same week Nadine showed up at Mrs. Fleming's boarding house on Forest Hill Avenue with the corn pudding dish. Under the Illinois Probate Act Article 11A, a family member can petition the court to appoint a guardian for an adult. They claim lacks the capacity to make sound financial decisions. It requires a physician's evaluation and a court hearing. He let that land. The petition on its own means nothing, he said, but it tells us exactly what they're setting up. I set my coffee cup down carefully. They're going to say I'm incompetent. They're going to try to build that case, Hewitt said. They need you confused, overwhelmed, leaning on their guidance. That's the whole point of the dinners. Every offer to help. They're constructing a record. He held my eyes. So we construct a better one. He reached into his desk drawer and placed a small device on the table between us. Matte black, no bigger than a thick pen. Illinois is a one-party consent state for audio recording, he said. You can legally record any conversation you're part of without telling the other person. This device runs 14 hours straight and transfers automatically to encrypted cloud storage. Every lie they tell you, every document they slide in front of you, every conversation where they pressure you to sign, something goes straight into a protected evidentiary file. He leaned forward. We're not entrapping anyone. We're documenting what they would do anyway. I turned the device in my hand lighter than I expected. The guardianship petition, I started. Already responded to on your behalf, he said. I've engaged Dr. Sylvia Okafor at Peoria Medical, one of the most respected neuropsychologists in Northern Illinois, for an independent cognitive assessment. Her evaluation will establish on record that you are fully competent. He paused. I've also notified the probate court. Under Illinois law, any guardianship petition filed against a named beneficiary during active probate proceedings must be disclosed to the estate judge. He's now aware that Nadine and Gareth are trying to establish legal control over you at the same time your inheritance is being settled. That fact alone carries weight. I looked over at Scout, asleep beneath the chair, gray muzzle resting on his front paws, breathing in the easy, uncomplicated rhythm of a dog who had decided he was exactly where he belonged. "Floyd would have liked you," I told Hewitt. "He did," Hewitt said, and allowed himself a small, genuine smile. "He was my client for 11 years. He started building this estate structure 4 years ago, specifically to make it hard to challenge." A pause. "He told me once that he had a friend who was too decent for his own good, and that decency was going to need some legal architecture around it eventually." My throat tightened. "He said exactly that." Hewitt confirmed it. I slipped the recording device into my breast pocket right over the left side of my chest. "What's the first move?" I asked. "You call Nadine," Hewitt said. "You tell her you've been doing some thinking, that maybe she had a point about you not managing all of this by yourself. You tell her you want to come home." He held my gaze. "Men like Gareth move fast when they sense an opening. That's when they get careless. That's when they show you exactly what they came for. And whatever they put in front of me to sign, take it. Tell them you need a few days. Bring it here. Don't sign anything no matter what they say about deadlines or urgency. Every document they hand you is evidence. Let them produce as many as they like." I nodded. Hewitt's tone shifted just slightly. "Are you certain you want to do this, Harold? It means walking back into that house. It means letting them believe they've got you." I thought about Cody standing on the cold front walk in his socks. I thought about Floyd's letter, written on yellow legal pad paper. I thought about 31 years of building things meant to last. "I'm sure," I said. I called Nadine from the parking lot, while Scout made his rounds along the base of every bare-limbed tree on the sidewalk. She picked up on the first ring. "Sweetheart," I said, letting some tiredness into my voice that wasn't entirely invented. "I've been doing a lot of thinking. You might have been right about me not carrying all of this alone." The sound she made was quick and completely unguarded. Pure relief, the involuntary kind that slips out before you can shape it. "Oh, Dad," she said. "I'm so glad you said that." I glanced at Hewitt through the office window. He was writing on his legal pad and didn't look up. I ended the call and stood in the cold parking lot with Scout on my feet and the recording device warm against my chest. The trap was open. Now we waited. Nadine had prepared the guest room, not the storage room where I'd spent 14 months listening to wind work its way through the drywall. The actual guest room. Second floor window facing the street. Fresh towels folded at the foot of the bed. A small lamp on the nightstand. 3 yellow carnations in a vase slightly wilted. The kind of gesture that costs $4 and is meant to communicate considerably more. I stood in the doorway with my overnight bag and understood precisely what those carnations were. An investment. A down payment on my goodwill. "We wanted you to be comfortable," Nadine said from behind me. "Gareth picked up those cookies you like from the bakery on Elm." "That's very thoughtful," I said. I let some slowness into the way I moved as I set my bag down. Not exaggerated, just the natural deceleration of a tired man grateful for somewhere soft to land. Hewitt had been clear about this. Don't perform incompetence. Perform exhaustion and gratitude. Men like Gareth fill in the rest on their own. Gareth materialized in the hallway, wearing a fleece vest over a collared shirt, the weekend uniform of a Midwestern man who wants to look at ease while staying in control. "Good to have you back, Dad," he said. "This is how it should be. Family looking after family." "I appreciate it," I said. "All this estate business, Gareth. I'll be honest with you, it's more than I bargained for. Makes my head swim a little." His shoulders dropped by a fraction. Small, but I caught it. "You shouldn't have to figure all of that out alone," he said. "Why don't we sit down after dinner and I'll have a look at some of the paperwork with you?" "That would be a real help," I said. The recording device sat in my breast pocket doing its job quietly and without complaint. Dinner was chicken and rice, simple, straightforward, Nadine's default when she wasn't putting on a show. Cody came to the table still in his school clothes, and when he spotted me, he went very still for just a moment before his face opened into something real. "You're back," he said. "I'm back," I told him. He looked at me with those careful eyes, the same ones that had stood on the cold front walk in his socks, and told me the truth. Then he reached over and poured himself a glass of milk with great deliberateness, his way of letting the moment pass without making it larger than it needed to be. 9 years old and already carrying more grace than both his parents put together. Cody headed upstairs once dinner wrapped up. Nadine busied herself with the dishes. Gareth topped off his water glass and dropped into the living room chair with the unhurried ease of a man who'd been counting the minutes until the others were gone. "So where do things actually stand with the estate?" he said. I settled across from him, wrapped both hands around my coffee mug, and gave him the look of a man relieved that somebody was finally paying attention. "Gordon Hewitt's got the reins on most of it," I said, drawing the words out. "Good man, meticulous, but the volume of paperwork alone is something. Just the stations have their own stack of documents, and that's before you get into the properties or the investment accounts." I gave a slow shake of my head. "I won't pretend it isn't more than I expected." Gareth pitched forward, elbows dropping to his knees, a man who recognizes an open door when he sees one. "Has Hewitt raised the idea of a power of attorney?" he asked. "Something to cover the everyday management." "It came up," I said, keeping it vague. "Something worth considering," Gareth said, opening his palms in the manner of a man offering nothing but good sense. "You'd have someone you trust who could handle the nuts and bolts without you drowning in it week after week. Your authority doesn't shrink. You just have somebody who can act when the properties or the stations need a quick decision." "I can see the logic in that," I said. Hadn't quite framed it that way before. The tightness went out of his shoulders visibly. "I can sketch out a summary," he said. "Nothing that commits you to anything, just enough to know what you'd be looking at." "I'd find that useful," I said. "Gareth, honestly, I'm glad Nadine got me to come back." The smile he gave me was the loosest I'd seen from him in 2 years. The smile of a man who thinks the uphill stretch is behind him. Nadine drifted into the doorway, took in Gareth's face and then mine, and her own expression eased with a kind of relief that's hard to watch because it costs something. She wanted this to be real, so badly that she'd stopped looking at it squarely. I wished them a good night and made my way upstairs. I stretched out on the guest room bed in the dark, the carnations drooping in their vase, Scout's breathing slow and even from the rug beside me. I'd worked it out with Mrs. Fleming to bring him, and Nadine had said yes without blinking, the frictionless yes of a woman who needs no ripples in the water. Gareth's voice filtered low through the wall from the bedroom down the hall. Telephone murmur words I couldn't catch. I didn't need them. The recording device on the nightstand was earning its keep. I laid my palm flat on the nightstand in the darkness and let my mind settle on Floyd, 3 pages filled out in his own hand. On yellow legal pad paper, a man who'd spent 42 years with his eyes open and who'd left behind something that outlasted the money. He'd left the truth set down with care, in no hurry to be found. One creak from the hallway floorboard, and then the house went still. He'll pick up the pace now, I thought. Gareth's already working the phones. 7 days went by. Every morning, Gareth materialized at the kitchen table with 2 coffees, reliable as a man with an agenda. He'd sit across from me and steer the conversation toward nothing in particular. Some weather a game he'd half-watched a neighbor's fence rotting on one side. Harmless talk. But underneath it every morning, I could feel him gauging the gap between where I stood and where he needed me. Thursday he arrived at the table, carrying a manila folder. "Dad," he said, lowering it between our mugs with the studied offhandedness of a man who'd practiced the move. I had my buddy Ray pull together that summary I mentioned how the estate management piece could work going forward. Ray's a business law guy, works downtown, good at what he does. I looked at the folder without touching it. "Quicker than I figured," I said. "Ray doesn't waste time," Gareth said, flipping it open himself and rotating it my way. "Take a look, nothing complicated about it, I promise. Just lays out what a durable power of attorney would mean for somebody in your position. A durable power of attorney in Illinois is a legal document that grants another person the agent authority to make financial and legal decisions on behalf of the person signing the principal. Where a standard power of attorney goes dark, if the principal loses capacity, the durable version keeps running. It's among the most consequential instruments in estate law. For that very reason, it doesn't wait for a court to declare the principal incompetent. A signature, a notary, and a witness, that's all it takes." What Gareth had placed in front of me was not a summary. It was the instrument itself, 12 pages already flagged at every signature line, with small yellow stickers printed "Sign Here" in red. I lifted it in both hands and walked my eyes across the first page at the deliberate pace of a man who finds fine print genuinely demanding. Looks like they were thorough about it, I said. Ray's thorough, Gareth said. He eased back into his chair mug in hand, watching me with the patient calm of a man who'd already scripted the morning's ending. What it comes down to is this: Nadine and I would be authorized to handle day-to-day decisions, signing off on transactions, keeping the property accounts in order, stepping in on the stations if something can't wait. You'd remain in charge of the whole picture. We'd just have the ability to move when you need us to. Sure. What sort of transactions are we talking? I asked. Standard things. Gareth said, a loose wave of the hand. Vendor payments, lease renewals, shifting money between accounts when the cash flow needs a nudge. Nothing significant. I turned to page 4. The language there bore no resemblance to Gareth's breezy description. The document conferred sweeping authority. Every financial account, all real property, every business interest and investment portfolio. No ceiling on transaction size. No obligation to notify or seek approval from the principal before acting. Stripped of the legal dressing, it was a mechanism to hand Gareth and Nadine total command of $22 million the instant my name touched page 12. Mind if I sit with this a few days? I asked. I want to work through the whole thing before I commit to anything. Eyes aren't as sharp as they once were. Gareth's jaw locked for a fraction of a second. He smoothed it over fast, but I'd been looking for exactly that. Absolutely, he said. Zero pressure. A smile. Read it at whatever pace works for you. Nadine stepped into the kitchen doorway, dish towel in hand. Her gaze went from the folder to Gareth, and something moved between them, a current that wasn't intended for me. Top you off, Dad? She asked. Thank you, sweetheart, I said. That afternoon, I drove over to Hewitt's office with the document riding in my coat pocket and Scout shifting restlessly in the passenger seat. Hewitt went through all 12 pages in silence. Finished, he laid it flat on the desk and sat with it a moment. Aggressive, he said. No cap on transactions, no notice requirements, no provision for a second signature. Had you signed this, they could have moved against every asset Floyd left you inside of 30 days, and the probate court would have had very little traction getting the funds back in any hurry. He lifted his eyes. Ray, whoever that is, didn't write this. Somebody with a practice in elder financial exploitation drafted these pages. The specificity of the language gives it away. Is there a way to find out who? I asked. Already pulled the firm name off page 1. Hewitt said, pressing a finger to the document's corner. I'll have my paralegal run their bar records. If there's a pattern of drafting these instruments in exploitation cases, that history joins our file. He uncapped his pen and wrote something on the legal pad. Every page is evidence, he said. Gareth handed you a fully executed document, tabs, and all at your kitchen table. He came in expecting to leave with your signature this morning. Stack that against the guardianship petition, and you get a coherent picture-coordinated financial elder abuse by the book under Illinois statute. I let myself sink back in the chair. Scout rested his chin on my knee. What's my move when I go back tonight? I asked. Tell him you've gone through it, and it reads clearly, Hewitt said. Say you just want to put 1 or 2 small questions to Hewitt before you sign, only being careful, so there's no question later that you went in blind. A thin smile crossed his face. It'll sting him, but it won't raise any flags. Fits perfectly with how a careful old man would handle it. I gathered the document from his desk and tucked it back into my coat. One last thing, Hewitt said. Anything different about what you've been eating or drinking over there? Anything that struck you as not quite right? I ran back through the week. The coffee Gareth set out every morning, without fail. The herbal tea Nadine had taken to leaving on the counter each evening, already made, already poured, sitting there waiting. There's a tea, I said, measuring the words. Nadine fixes it every evening, says it's good for sleep. Hewitt held my gaze without shifting. Have you been drinking it? His first couple of nights, I said. Both times I was heavy-lidded within the hour, put it down to being worn out. Hewitt wrote something. His face stayed even, but something behind his eyes went sharp and very still. Don't touch anything you haven't made yourself, he said, starting tonight. I drove back to Nadine's house through the early November dark with the document riding in my coat pocket and Hewitt's last words sitting in my chest, like something cold and heavy. Scout leaned against the passenger door and watched the streetlights tick past one after another, steady as anything reliable in this world. The man showed up on Saturday morning in a gray sedan. I tracked him from the guest room window as he pulled into the driveway. 45, maybe medium build, dark overcoat, slim briefcase that looked more expensive than everything else about him. He moved with the deliberate stride of a man who had been hired to project confidence and was putting in the effort. Gareth was at the door before the bell finished ringing. "Dad?" Gareth turned to me with a broad smile, his hand resting on the stranger's shoulder. "This is Harlan Bowden, financial consultant. He's helped me think through some estate transition work. Thought it'd be worthwhile for you two to sit down." Harlan Bowden offered his hand and shook mine with the calibrated grip of a man who had worked out the precise pressure a handshake should carry. "Mr. Vance," he said, "I've heard quite a bit about you. Gareth speaks very well of you." "Does he?" I said. Nadine came out of the kitchen and steered us into the living room, returning with coffee and a plate of those bakery cookies from Elm that had been making regular appearances for 2 weeks now, functioning as a kind of goodwill currency. Harlan Bowden set his briefcase on the coffee table and worked it open with the unhurried ease of a man accustomed to his own performance. He lifted out a bound document 20 pages or so, with a cover sheet bearing the name of a financial services firm in clean professional type. "What I've put together for you," he said, pivoting toward me in the practiced tone of a man who makes his living explaining things to the elderly, "is what we call a family asset protection agreement. It's built for circumstances like yours, a significant inheritance that needs careful stewardship against tax exposure, market risk, and the administrative drag of probate." I studied the cover page. The firm name meant nothing to me. The address was a suite number in a downtown building, the kind that might contain a single room, a printer, and a telephone line. "How long have you been working in this area?" I asked. 12 years, he said, without any hesitation that might have given him away. "Primarily estate transitions and family wealth management." I nodded unhurried. "And what does this agreement actually accomplish?" Harlan Bowden had a ready answer. He had ready answers for all of it, which was itself worth noting. "It pulls the estate assets into a single administrative structure," he said, "with Nadine and Gareth as co-administrators. It cuts out the delays and overhead of routing routine decisions through the probate court. It shields the assets from creditor exposure during the administration window, and it guarantees continuity, so if anything were to happen to you, there's no lapse in management." Every sentence was assembled from legitimate-sounding words in a plausible-sounding order. None of it described what the pages in my hands actually said. I worked my way to page 3. The Family Asset Protection Agreement was not a protective instrument. It was a transfer vehicle. Upon execution, it would shift every estate asset into a jointly administered trust with Nadine and Gareth as sole trustees, empowered to buy, sell, liquidate, or distribute at their sole discretion, with no court oversight, required no reporting obligation to the probate estate, and no mechanism by which the original grantor, meaning me, could undo the transfer once made. Sign it, and it was finished. "Could I get a copy to look over?" I asked. "I'd like to run it by my doctor. He helps me sort through paperwork." A quick flicker moved across Harlan Bowden's face, not quite alarm, closer to recalculation. "Of course," he said. "That's entirely reasonable." Gareth watched from the armchair, holding very still. Nadine refilled the coffee cups with a steady hand and a smile that stopped at her cheekbones. I sat with the bound document in my lap and worked Harlan Bowden through several more questions about things I understood, completely framed in the vocabulary of a man who finds large figures bewildering. He answered each one with the patient condescension that flowed straight into the recording device against my chest. After an hour, Harlan Bowden pressed my hand a second time and assured me the arrangement would feel very straightforward once I'd had the chance to review it. Gareth walked him to the door, and from the hallway came. Their voices dropped low, brief, carrying the tight urgency of 2 men who believe they are behind schedule. That afternoon, I photographed every page of the Family Asset Protection Agreement on my phone and sent the images to Hewitt. He rang me back inside 20 minutes. "Where are you right now?" he asked. "Parked outside a hardware store on Jefferson," I said. "Needed some air." "Good." His voice had the focused quality it gets when something substantial has come across his desk. "Harlan Bowden is not a licensed financial consultant in the state of Illinois. I just checked the IDFPR database. The Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation has no active record of him holding any license in financial services, investment advising, or estate planning." Across the lot, a woman loaded bags into her trunk unhurried. "So he isn't a consultant," I said. "He is not," Hewitt said. "He's someone Gareth brought in to produce a document engineered to move your assets out from under the probate court's supervision." That is wire fraud, mail fraud. If anything went through the post, an elder financial exploitation under Illinois Criminal Code, Section 1756. All of it is now on the record. A pause. Harold, we have enough. Enough for what? I asked. Enough to go to the investigators, he said. Adult Protective Services Financial Crimes Unit and the state's attorney's office have both been briefed. They are positioned to move when we give the word. Another pause. The only question left is when and where you want this to end. I thought about Floyd's house on the east side of town, the flat back lawn, the old oak trees, the wide open sky above the rear fence. I have an idea about that, I said. The tea appeared every evening at 7 o'clock. Nadine would set it on the kitchen counter in a white ceramic mug, already poured steam rising chamomile coming through, and beneath it, something else I couldn't quite place. She never pushed it on me, never hovered to watch me drink. She simply left it there the way you leave something for a person you count on reaching for it from habit. After Hewitt's warning, I stopped reaching. Each evening when Nadine stepped into another room, I emptied it down the kitchen sink, then rinsed the mug and set it back on the counter so the level in the pot fell the way it would if someone had taken a full serving. On the third evening, Gareth glanced at the empty mug sitting on the counter, and something in the way he held himself settled a small, quiet adjustment, the kind a person makes when a mechanism is performing as designed. On the fourth evening, I drew a sample from the pot, pulled it off into a small glass bottle I'd picked up at the pharmacy, and brought it to Hewitt the next morning. He sent it to a private toxicology lab in Chicago. The results came back in 6 days. Lorazepam, a benzodiazepine sedative, prescription-only, standard use for anxiety and sleep disorders. In low doses given repeatedly, it produces drowsiness, mild slowing of thought, and a softening of alertness. Precisely the profile of a man who looks like he's losing his grip and things, who seems to need guidance, who might strike a physician doing a surface-level evaluation, as no longer capable of managing his own affairs. Hewitt called me with the findings on a Tuesday morning while I was walking scout along the edge of Floyd's property on the east side of town. The concentration is consistent with a standard low dose, he said, administered regularly over a period of weeks. At that level, it wouldn't announce itself, just a gradual dulling. A pause. This is criminal, Harold. Administering a controlled substance to someone without their knowledge or consent is a felony under Illinois law, specifically under the criminal drugging statute and separately under elder abuse provisions. I was standing at the back fence of Floyd's property, looking out over the wide flat yard with its oak trees along the edges and that gray November sky pressing down above them. Has it all gone into the file? I asked. Everything is in the file, Gordon said. The toxicology report, the chain of custody documentation for the sample, his notes on when I'd first noticed the symptoms. Adult Protective Services had a financial crimes investigator named Yvonne Sutter assigned to the case. She'd reviewed the full file the day before. She was ready. I held the silence for a moment. Scout worked his way along the fence line, with his nose dragging the ground, unhurried and focused. Gordon, I said, I want to do this at Floyd's house. Tell me what you're thinking, he said. So I told him the backyard, the oak trees, the flat open lawn that had held summer evenings for years. I told him about the people I wanted there. Mrs. Fleming, who had given me a room when I had nowhere else to go. Brenda Quigley, the nurse at the Forest Hill Avenue Clinic, who had helped me get my blood pressure prescription refilled when I had no car and no insurance card, because the card was still going to Nadine's address. Len Mabry, who had run Floyd's stations and known him for 11 years. A handful of neighbors from Floyd's block who had waved to me every morning when I walked scout past their houses. And Nadine and Gareth. Of course, Gordon said. I want them to come as family, I said. I want them walking in thinking it's a celebration, smiling at the neighbors, bringing food, feeling like they've already won. Gordon was quiet for a beat. And Yvonne Sutter. She and her colleague can come through at 2:00, I said, after everyone's had enough time to settle in. That works, he said. I'll coordinate with her office. Another pause. What about the tea? I'd already worked this out in my head. Nadine will bring it, I said. She brings something every visit, food, drinks, always something. She won't show up to a party empty-handed. And when she offers it to me, I'm going to hand it to Gareth. The silence on Gordon's end was short and very satisfied. I'll be there at noon, he said. I crossed Floyd's yard toward the house, Scout moving alongside me through the dry November grass. At the back door, I paused, one hand resting on the frame. Brenda Quigley had found me on the clinic steps one morning in late October, 3 weeks after Gareth had locked me out, trying to puzzle out how to get my prescription filled without a current insurance card. She'd been coming off a night shift, coat half on, keys already in her hand. She had given me 20 minutes she didn't owe me. She'd called the insurance line herself, waited on hold, and gotten the whole thing sorted. She hadn't asked how I'd ended up in that position. She'd just helped. I pulled out my phone and called her. "Brenda," I said when she picked up her voice, carrying that faintly flattened quality that comes at the tail end of a long shift. "This is Harold Vance. You helped me with my prescription back in October." "Mr. Vance?" Her voice warmed right away. "Of course. How are you?" "Better than I was," I told her. "I'm having some people over on Saturday the 14th. Small gathering, backyard barbecue, nothing formal. I'd really like it if you came." A brief pause. "I'd like that," she said. "Should I bring anything?" "Just yourself," I said. "That's more than enough." I ended the call and looked at the yard one more time. The oak trees had gone bare, their branches clean and sharp against the gray sky, that kind of stark November beauty that doesn't ask anything of you, just gives you room for whatever is already there. Floyd had stood in this yard for 30 years. He had built something here, not just the house and the stations and the portfolio, but something quieter, a life with space in it for other people. I meant to honor that. I was up before the sun. Scout heard me moving around the kitchen at 5:30 and padded in from the living room, his nails ticking on the hardwood tail, making that slow, steady arc that meant he was fine with whatever was happening as long as he was part of it. I filled his bowl, made coffee, and stood at Floyd's kitchen window, watching the December sky shift from black to that particular deep blue that comes just before the first gray light of a winter morning. Floyd had probably stood at this same window most mornings for 30 years. I found myself wondering what he'd thought about, whether it was the stations, the properties, the portfolio, or whether it had just been the yard and the oak trees and the warmth of the coffee in his hands. I thought it was probably the coffee and the trees. Len Mabry arrived at 8 with 2 of his guys from the East Side Station. They set up the grill in the backyard with the easy coordination of men who know how to get things done without a lot of back and forth. Len was 61, compact build, gray mustache, the quiet confidence of someone who'd spent decades making things run right and found real satisfaction in that. "He would have loved this," Len said, looking out at the yard. "He really would have," I said. Len squeezed my shoulder once and turned back to the grill without making it into anything more, which was exactly right. Mrs. Fleming arrived at 9:30, 2 apple pies in a carrier, her good coat buttoned up. She set the pies on the folding table I'd put up along the back fence and took in the yard with the measuring eye of a woman who needs to determine whether a situation has been properly managed. "Nice yard," she said. "Floyd kept it up." "He did." I agreed. "You gonna keep it up?" "I'm gonna try," I said. She gave one satisfied nod and went to introduce herself to Len's crew. Brenda arrived at 10:15, still in her scrubs, under her coat, coming straight from a morning shift. She shook my hand and looked around the yard with the slightly startled expression of someone who'd pictured something much smaller. "This is really something, Mr. Vance," she said. "Harold," I told her. "Please." She smiled the real kind, nothing performed in it. Gordon arrived at 11:30 carrying his briefcase and a covered dish. His wife had sent corn pudding, which he set on the table with just slightly more care than a man who considered himself entirely unsentimental. He caught my eye and tilted his head toward the far corner of the yard. We moved to the back fence out of earshot. He opened the briefcase and handed me a thick manila envelope sealed. "Everything is in there," he said quietly. "Toxicology report, full recording. Transcripts the power of attorney, document the family asset protection agreement with Harlan Bowden's fraudulent credentials, attach the guardianship petition filing, and Yvonne Sutter's preliminary investigative report." He paused. "Yvonne and her colleague will come through the side gate at 2:00. They'll hold back until you signal." I tucked the envelope into my coat's inside pocket. "The recording device?" he asked. I patted my breast pocket. Still there, still running. By 11:45, the yard had found that particular quality a good gathering gets when it settles into its own rhythm. Len at the grill. Mrs. Fleming, in conversation with a neighbor, couple from Floyd's block, Bert and Edna Kozak, who'd brought a fruit salad and a 12-pack of root beer. Brenda on the back steps with Scout's head in her lap, looking like she'd always belonged there. At 11:58, the side gate opened. Nadine came through first casserole dish in hand, a smile calibrated precisely to project warmth at a gathering where she needed people to like her. Gareth followed with a paper bag, a bottle of wine, and that particular social ease he switched on whenever he needed a room on his side. And just behind them, holding a thermal carafe with both hands, Nadine turned back and called out brightly to the yard, "I made herbal tea. Dad loves it before a big meal." She set the carafe on the table beside Mrs. Fleming's apple pies. I looked at the carafe. I looked at Gareth shaking Len's hand. I looked at Mrs. Fleming watching Nadine with the expression of a woman who had seen enough of the world to know when careful watching was warranted. I picked up my coffee mug and walked toward the grill. The moment was coming. I could feel it moving toward me through the cold December air, the way you feel weather on the horizon before it arrives, slow certain and entirely unavoidable. By 1:00, the yard had settled into itself the way good gatherings do. Len had the ribs going, smoke curling slow and fragrant through the cold December air. Bert Kozak had claimed the folding chair closest to the grill and was deep in some story with Len that required considerable use of his hands. Edna Kozak was helping Mrs. Fleming lay out the side dishes along the fence table. Brenda sat cross-legged on the back steps, with Scout feeding him small bites from her plate. And Scout accepted each one with the solemn dignity of a dog who understood he was a guest at a proper occasion. Gareth had worked the yard hard through that first hour, shaking hands, laughing at exactly the right moments, refilling drinks, performing the devoted son-in-law with the practiced ease of a man who had spent his whole adult life treating other people's goodwill as a resource to be carefully managed. Nadine moved through the gathering more quietly, steadier a hand on someone's arm, hear a warm word there. She was better at it than Gareth, more natural. Watching her, I felt a particular ache at the thought of what she might have been if she'd pointed herself somewhere else. At 1:15, Nadine came to where I stood near the oak trees with my coffee mug and a mostly untouched plate of potato salad. She lifted the carafe from the side table and brought it over. "You haven't had any tea," she said. "Let me get you some." She reached for my empty coffee mug. "It's cold out here. This'll warm you up." She poured. The steam rose from the mug with that chamomile and something underneath smell I had learned to recognize. She held it out with a smile that was almost entirely convincing. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said. I took the mug in both hands. Then I turned and walked toward the grill where Gareth was standing with Len, his own hands free, his plate left on the side table. I held the mug out to him. "Gareth," I said, keeping my voice easy. "Nadine made tea. You've been on your feet all morning. Have some." Something moved across his face, fast, involuntary, gone in under a second. His eyes went to the mug, then to me, then to Nadine across the yard. I watched him work through whether there was any way to say no that wouldn't look strange in front of Len Mabry and Bert Kozak and everyone else within eyeline. There wasn't. He took the mug. "Thanks, Dad," he said, voice perfectly steady, which told me exactly how much effort that steadiness cost him. He drank not all of it, just a polite swallow, then set the mug on the edge of the side table and turned back to the conversation with Len. 8 minutes later, Len said something that needed a response. Gareth opened his mouth and what came out was not the word he meant. He blinked. He tried again. His hand reached for the side table and caught the mug before it tipped, but only barely, his fingers not closing the way he'd expected them to. "You all right?" Len asked. "Fine," Gareth said. But it came out soft and slightly sideways, and his eyes had gone heavy at the corners, the way eyes go when the mind behind them is working far harder than usual, just to stay on the surface. The yard went quiet by degrees, the way a room goes quiet when something is plainly happening, but no one has put a name to it yet. Nadine was staring at Gareth from across the yard, her hands pressed flat against her thighs, and the color had drained from her face, not quite white, but moving steadily in that direction. I set my plate on the side table. I picked up the carafe and carried it to the center table, setting it down next to Mrs. Fleming's apple pies where everyone could see it. Then I stood straight and looked around at the faces gathered in Floyd's backyard. Len, who had run Floyd's stations for 11 years. Mrs. Fleming, who had handed me the key to room 7 without asking a single question. Brenda, who had waited on hold so I could get my blood pressure medication filled. Bert and Edna Kozak, who had waved to me every morning from their front porch when I walked Scout past their house, and I had been nobody to them but a man with a dog. Gordon Hewitt stood near the back fence with his hands in his coat pockets watching. Gareth was leaning against the side table now, one hand gripping the edge, his jaw working at something he couldn't quite get out. I spoke in a voice that was clear and unhurried, carrying across the yard without needing any volume. 2 weeks ago, I said, my daughter and her husband put me out of their house in the rain with $500 and a broken suitcase. Today they came back with ribs and apple pie and herbal tea. I looked at the carafe. The tea has been in my home every evening for the past 3 weeks. 2 evenings I drank it. Both times I was asleep within the hour, slower than I should have been, confused in ways I am not usually confused. I reached into my coat and pulled out the manila envelope. A toxicology report from a licensed laboratory in Chicago confirmed that the tea contains lorazepam, that is a prescription sedative. Administering it to another person without their knowledge is a felony in the state of Illinois. Nadine made a sound that wasn't a word. Gareth pushed himself upright from the table, his eyes sharpening, now something burning through the lorazepam on pure adrenaline, and his mouth opened, and whatever he meant to say came out as the wrong kind of noise entirely. I wasn't finished. I opened the manila envelope. The first page was the toxicology report. I held it up so the December light caught it clearly and read the relevant line aloud. Lorazepam detected concentration consistent with repeated low-dose administration over a period of 2 to 4 weeks. I set it on the table. This is from Prairie State Toxicology Lab in Chicago, licensed laboratory certified chain of custody. Nadine's hands came up and covered her mouth. Her shoulders pulled inward like something giving way from the center. Gareth straightened fully, the lorazepam fighting the adrenaline in his system, and his voice came out louder than he'd intended. That is completely fabricated. You cannot stand here in front of these people and accuse us of poisoning you based on some document you paid someone to produce. Gareth, my voice was very quiet. Every word you say right now is being recorded. I reached up and touched my breast pocket. Once, just once. His mouth closed. I set the second document on the table beside the toxicology report. This is the durable power of attorney or associate drafted. 12 pages, no transaction limits, no notification requirements. Full authority over all accounts and properties. I set down the third. This is the Family Asset Protection Agreement that Harlan Bowden presented on your behalf on a Saturday morning in November. Harlan Bowden holds no active license with the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation. I checked. Gordon Hewitt checked. The state's attorney's office has also checked. Len Mabry had set down his tongs. Bert Kozak had stopped talking entirely. Mrs. Fleming stood at the end of the table, with her hands folded, her face carrying the expression of a woman who had suspected something and was not remotely surprised to find she'd been right. Brenda had her hand resting on Scout's back. Scout hadn't moved from the steps. I set down the fourth document. This is the guardianship petition Nadine and Gareth filed 4 days after Nadine first appeared at my door with a casserole dish. They filed it the same week they were offering to help me navigate the estate. They were asking a court to declare me mentally incompetent while presenting themselves as my trusted family support. I looked at Nadine directly. You filed it on a Tuesday. You brought the casserole on a Friday. Nadine made a sound that began as a denial and became something else entirely, a ragged, broken exhale that bent her forward at the waist. She grabbed the edge of the table with both hands, knuckles going white, tears falling straight down onto the tablecloth. "Dad," she said, her voice fraying at the edges. "Dad, please. I know how this looks. I know. But I was scared. Gareth said we were going to lose everything, that the bills were too much, that this was the only way to get stable. I didn't want to hurt you. I never wanted to hurt you. Nadine." My voice did not rise. The night Cody stood on the front walk in his socks and told me what Gareth had said. You were in the kitchen tending the beef brisket when you heard him say. It heard him tell your 9-year-old grandson that his grandfather had ceased to be family the moment he stopped producing money, and you kept stirring. Nadine's knees went out from under her. She grabbed the table edge and barely stayed upright. Gareth moved toward me, jaw-locked eyes burning with the specific rage of a man whose scheme has just unraveled and who needs a target for it. "You set us up." His voice was strangled and unsteady. "You brought us out here to make us look like fools in front of people we don't even know. You're a bitter old man who never gave the people closest to him a fair chance at anything. And now you're trying to ruin us just for doing what we had to do to get by." No. What I said was that I gave my family 14 months. I repaired your garbage disposal, your faucet, your screen door. I kept your son 3 afternoons every week. I slept in a storage room where cold air came through the wall. I never said a word about it. I lifted the manila envelope off the table and held it steady. I didn't lay any trap here, Gareth. I just quit stepping aside and let you march straight into the one you'd constructed for yourselves. At exactly 200 Road, the side gate swung open. Yvonne Sutter was first through. A compact woman somewhere in her early 50s, gray coat, her colleague trailing half a step behind. She carried herself with the settled efficiency of someone who has done this work long enough that she doesn't need a dramatic entrance to fill a space. She took in the documents laid across the table. She looked at Gareth. Then she looked at me. "Mr. Vance," she said. "Yvonne Sutter, adult, Protective Services, Financial Crimes Unit. I think you have something that belongs with me." I passed her the manila envelope. Gareth's expression moved through several things. Fast fury first, then the gears of calculation, then something that stopped just short of fear, but was close enough to smell it. His eyes went to Hewitt, who was standing near the fence at the back of the yard. Hewitt met his gaze with the flat look of someone who has run out of things to say on the matter. "You'll need to come along with us," Yvonne Sutter told Gareth. No raised voice, no theater, just a simple statement delivered by a woman who said what she meant and left no room for negotiation. "There are questions we need answered." Nadine hadn't let go of the table. Her head was bowed and she was crying the way crying happens when there's nothing left holding it back. Not a performance, just the sound that escapes a person when the face they've been wearing finally cracks all the way through. I studied her for a long beat. "Cody is yours to call anytime you want," I said. "None of this touches that. He's 9 years old, and what happened here isn't something he carries." She raised her eyes to mine. They were swollen and red and carrying nothing strategic in them at all. "Dad," she whispered. "Go home, Nadine," I said. "Find yourself a lawyer. Look after your boy." She released the table and turned. She walked straight to the side gate, past Gareth, past everyone, and stepped through without a backward look, and that was that. 2 minutes later, Gareth followed Yvonne Sutter and her colleague out the same gate arms at his sides, his jaw still set. The way it had been all afternoon, but behind his eyes something had gone very still. The way stillness comes over a person, the moment they truly reckon with the depth of the situation they're in. The gate latch shut. The yard settled into quiet. Scout ambled across the dead grass and planted himself on top of my feet. Come Monday morning, I went to Mrs. Fleming's boarding house on Forest Hill Avenue and renewed my room for another 6 months. She studied the check I set on her kitchen table, then looked up at me with the expression she reserves for opinions she hasn't quite decided to speak aloud. "You're in a position to do better than this place," she said. "I'm aware," I said. She folded the check into her hand. "Room 7 stays yours." I had turned the idea of moving into Floyd's house on the east side of town over in my mind more than once. I'd walked through every room, paced the yard at various hours, settled into Floyd's chair at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, and tried to determine whether it felt like somewhere I belonged. It was a solid house. Floyd had taken care of it. But whenever I sat in it, what I felt was the feeling of a visitor, someone waiting for the man who lived there to walk back in. That man wasn't walking back in, and I didn't believe that taking over his house was the same as honoring everything he had made of his life. Room 7 was mine. Had been mine from the first evening I slept there. The lamp that leaned the water stain on the ceiling, shaped a little like the state of Michigan. The radiator with its knock and hiss. These things had become the landmarks of a life I'd put together from scratch. I wasn't willing to exchange them for square footage just because I now had the means to do so. It was a Wednesday afternoon in January when Nadine rang. I was out at Floyd's East Side station with Len tucked into the back office behind the register, working through the commercial property lease renewals with the deliberate focus of a man who is 69 years old and still mastering a new set of skills. I picked up. "How's Cody?" I got that in before she had a chance to start. A pause. "He's doing well. He earned a spot on the school basketball team." The way she spoke was restrained, scrubbed clean of its usual social polish. Just the plain sound of her voice, which I hadn't really been able to hear through everything for quite some time. "Dad, this isn't a call about the money. None of that is why I'm reaching out. I only wanted to know you were all right." "I'm all right," I said. Another silence. "Then what is the money even for Dad?" Her voice had dropped quieter than her usual register. The tone she uses when she's actually saying something, rather than managing an impression. You're still living in that little room. Through the office window, I could see Len out at the pump island, chatting with a customer, hands resting in his vest pockets, easy in his own skin. So I can see who still shows up when I'm nothing more than a man in a small room. I told her. She sat with that for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice held the first trace of something I can only describe as the beginning of understanding, which arrives more slowly than agreement does, and by a different road. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay, Dad." I asked her to pass Cody my number. She told me she would. In February, Hewitt and I completed the paperwork to create the Floyd Easton Scholarship Fund as a registered 501c3 nonprofit organization under Illinois law. It would deliver annual scholarships to students enrolled in Peoria area vocational programs, mechanics, electrical plumbing, the trades that Floyd and I had both come up through, and that we'd never for a moment considered inferior to any other kind of work. The inaugural awards were set to go out that spring. Len attended the filing meeting and brought along 2 of the senior employees from the stations, both men who had come aboard as mechanics and risen into management under Floyd's style of mentorship, which was patient and demanding in equal measure. They gathered around the conference table at Hewitt's office and spent a full hour just talking about Floyd before we ever touched the documents. It was the finest hour I have ever passed inside the office. On a Saturday toward the end of February, I drove the circuit of all 8 of Floyd's stations, not to assess anything, not to make any calls, just to show my face. I went around and shook the hands of the men and women who had come in day after day and kept the operations going because Floyd had built his staff with care and treated them accordingly, and they had paid that back by giving a damn about the work they did. At the last stop, the original station on the east side, Len took me around to the small lot behind the building where Floyd had pulled in his truck for 11 years. The space sat empty. There was an oil stain worked so deep into the concrete it had ceased to be a stain and had simply become the concrete. "He used to mention you," Len said. "Not regularly, but every time he did it came out the same. 'My friend Harold,' he'd say. And then, whatever the story was like, your name was just the natural start of the sentence." I had nothing to offer in response to that. I set my palm flat against the cold concrete wall and held it there. That evening, I took a seat on the bench in Floyd's backyard. Scout settled alongside me. The 2 of us turned toward the elm trees in the fading light of a February dusk. I pulled the watch from my coat pocket and worked it slowly through my fingers. The crystal was scratched. The hands moved the way they always move, steady and indifferent to everything. I pressed the case open and read the engraving again. "Thank you for saving my life that year. Everything after was because of you. For 38 years I had carried the assumption that I hadn't done much of anything. A tire iron, a frozen stretch of roadside, 2 minutes of being the person who happened to be there. Floyd had spent those same 38 years turning that moment into 8 gas stations and 7 commercial properties, and a managed portfolio, and a dog named Scout, and a scholarship fund that was only now coming into existence, all of it traceable back to an afternoon in 1986 that I had never thought twice about. I slid the watch onto my wrist, not because I had made up my mind to keep it. Truth is, I'd always known I was going to keep it. I slid it onto my wrist because it was February, and the cold had settled into everything, and Scout was pressed against my leg with his full warm weight, and Floyd had been right about all of it, and it was past time I started carrying some proof of that on my person. Scout raised his head and held my gaze. "You know what Floyd would tell me right now," I said to him. His tail swept once slow and sure, the same arc it had traced in the hallway outside room 7 on the night this whole thing got started. He'd say, "Get off that bench, old man. The work isn't finished yet." I pushed myself to my feet. My knees registered their usual protest against the cold. I took in the elm trees, the flat stretch of yard, the February sky bleeding pink and gray behind the back fence. Then I went inside and got back to it. People put that question to me sometimes: what did I take away from everything that happened? My answer doesn't change. Blood is not a contract, I tell them. If you've stayed with me all the way to the end of this one, I want to say thank you. Truly. I've thought about this story a long time. What it cost the cold nights in that small room, the silence at holiday tables, the slow grind of being doubted by the people who were supposed to know you best, and what it gave back. I believe God doesn't waste the hard years. The long way around is still a way through, and sometimes it leads somewhere you never could have planned for yourself. That's what I took from all of this. Here's what I'd pass along to anyone who needs it. Blood alone doesn't make someone family. Watch how a person treats you when you have nothing to offer them. If someone is working to make you look small, don't argue. Build quietly, and let the evidence speak when the time comes. An act of kindness you've long forgotten may be the thing that changes another person's entire life. So don't keep score, just show up. Never let anyone convince you that your best years are already behind you. Harold Vance was 69 years old and still beginning. These grandpa revenge stories stay with people because they're really father stories. Stories about dignity, about what a man owes himself, and about what it looks like to finally stop apologizing for taking up space. If this one moved you, leave a comment below and let me know what landed. Share it with someone who could use the reminder that it's not over yet. And if you haven't already subscribed to Grandpa's Revenge, there are more stories like this one waiting for you. Thank you for spending this time with me. I'll see you in the next one.